The devil came home to Jerez, and the sacred asphalt of the Circuito de Jerez Angel Nieto bled deep, furious red beneath an Andalusian sky that had turned against the entire field. What took place on Saturday afternoon was never meant to be remembered as a simple 12-lap sprint race. It was something far darker, far more ancient, and far more personal. It was a war bulletin scratched into the wet tarmac with tire marks, spilled fuel, and pure, unfiltered will. A 12-lap sermon delivered at breakneck speed where one man looked fate dead in the eyes, grabbed it by the throat, squeezed until it submitted, and then stood victorious in the pouring rain with fire still burning in his chest and a trophy clenched in his fist. Marc Márquez arrived at his home circuit carrying wounds that went far beyond the visible scar, still healing on his arm from that terrifying high-speed crash in Texas barely a month earlier. The reigning world champion, the 8-time title winner, the rider widely regarded as the most dangerous and gifted talent in the entire history of motorcycle racing, walked into this weekend haunted by a season that had refused to bend to his will. 0 Grand Prix podiums so far in 2026. Inconsistent results, lingering pain, the shadow of his own colossal legacy hanging over him like a storm cloud. The paddock had already begun writing the next chapter without him at the center. The verdict was loud, public, and merciless. Márquez was no longer untouchable. The fire was dimming. The king was finally falling. Yet on Friday, standing in front of the microphones with that calm, almost humble tone that only hides the volcano inside, he delivered words that sounded like concession to everyone who didn't truly know him. A podium would already be optimistic. I don't have the potential to attack right now. The critics pounced. They celebrated what they believed was the beginning of the end. They prepared their columns, their hot takes, and their farewell narratives. They had no idea that the man they were burying was quietly loading the gun that would shoot their stories to pieces. Then the rain arrived like divine intervention. Saturday morning brought relentless sheets of water that washed away data, predictions, and conventional wisdom. In those brutal, slippery conditions where every corner becomes a gamble and every lap a test of pure survival instinct, Marc Márquez suddenly found his true element. He ended a painful 245-day pole drought by snatching the top spot in qualifying by a razor-thin 0.14 seconds over Johann Zarco. The rest of the field, including the current title contenders and celebrated frontrunners, were left floundering nearly a full second behind in the dirt and spray. When that pole time flashed on the screens, the massive Jerez crowd didn't just cheer, they let out a collective breath they had been holding for 8 long, difficult months. The sprint race itself was scheduled for only 12 laps, but 12 laps with Marc Márquez on pole in changing wet conditions is never merely 12 laps. It becomes a battlefield of psychological pressure, physical punishment, split-second decisions made at terrifying speeds, and a level of competitive fury that most riders will never understand. He launched off the line with a perfect hole shot, asserting immediate control. For several laps the race settled into a tense, emotional brotherly battle as Alex Márquez, the defending Spanish Grand Prix champion riding with raw hunger and home circuit pride, charged forward and took the lead on lap 7. The 120,000 fans packed into the grandstands lost their minds at the sight of the two Márquez brothers fighting wheel-to-wheel on their home soil. It felt poetic. It felt personal. It felt like the perfect script. Then the sky tore itself open. The rain didn't simply increase, it attacked with sudden savage violence. In moments the track turned into a flowing river of standing water and uncertainty. Toprak Razgatlioglu and Lorenzo Savadori collided in a heavy impact that scattered debris and tension across the circuit. Chaos reigned. And right then, at the most unforgiving moment possible, disaster struck at turn 13, the final corner just past the pit lane entry. On slicks in a sudden monsoon, Márquez lost the front. The bike snapped away from him violently. Any ordinary rider would have stayed down in the gravel, accepted the cruel hand of fate, and watched their hopes wash away with the rain. But Marc Márquez has never been ordinary. He is not built like other men. He kept the engine running. In an act of pure defiance that will be talked about for generations, he somehow dragged the sliding machine across the grass, cut the corner with ruthless efficiency, and stormed into the pit lane entry in just 20 seconds from the moment of impact. While the rest of the leading group, including his own brother Alex, continued to fight their way around the circuit on completely the wrong tires, losing huge chunks of time as the rain hammered down harder, Márquez's crew was ready. A fresh bike with proper wet tires was waiting. He rejoined the race not as a wounded rider who had crashed, but as a reborn predator with fresh rubber, renewed rage, and absolutely nothing left to lose. From that point forward, the sprint race turned into an absolute massacre. Alex Márquez, who had dared to lead his older brother in front of their home crowd, crashed out in the treacherous conditions. Marco Bezzecchi, the championship leader who had come to Jerez riding a wave of 6 consecutive Grand Prix victories and 121 straight laps led, saw his rear tire spin uselessly on a tear-off right at the start and later crashed in the worsening rain. Jorge Martin's Aprilia suffered a catastrophic front brake disc overheating failure early in the race, the glowing red disc screaming on television replays like a dying signal. Miller crashed, Binder crashed, Mir picked up penalties. Savadori and Toprak had already taken each other out. Rider after rider, whether on slicks or wets, disappeared into the gravel traps or limped back broken and defeated. When the storm finally began to spit out the few survivors still standing, only 2 factory Ducatis remained at the front, Francesco Bagnaia and Marc Márquez. They ran 1-2 for several laps, the 2 most powerful riders on the grid somehow still upright while bodies and bikes littered the circuit behind them. But there was only ever going to be one king on this day. With 3 laps to go, Márquez produced a clean, ice-cold, perfectly calculated pass at turn 9. No hesitation, no mistake, just the quiet authority of a man who had decided the story would end his way. The explosion of noise from the 120,000 fans was unlike anything seen in recent years. It wasn't just cheering, it was emotional catharsis, months of doubt and frustration pouring out in one deafening roar of relief, reverence, and raw belief. Morbidelli somehow fought his way onto the final podium step after starting all the way back in 18th position on the grid, a result that perfectly summed up the beautiful insanity of the afternoon. In the factory Ducati garage, Gigi D'Allegna and David Tarduzzi stood watching with visible shock on their faces. Their team, which had struggled to dominate the front for much of the season, had just delivered a commanding 1-2 result in the most chaotic conditions imaginable. And the man responsible for turning disaster into triumph was the same rider who had sounded almost defeated only 24 hours earlier. Marc Márquez had entered the Jerez weekend written off by many voices. He left it having authored one of the most savage, intelligent, courageous, and unforgettable comebacks the sport has witnessed in years. He crashed at the worst possible corner at the worst possible moment, and then used that very crash as the ultimate strategic weapon. He turned 20 seconds of potential catastrophe into a decisive advantage. He passed his own title-contending teammate in the pouring rain on live television in front of his adoring home crowd. He reminded every critic, every rival, and fate itself that the word impossible simply does not exist in his personal dictionary. Never give up is not a motivational phrase when it comes from Marc Márquez. It is a cold, calculated threat. This was Jerez 2026 sprint race. Blood on the asphalt, rain punishing the weak, chaos devouring the field, one man rising from the wreckage like a demon reborn, one impossible decision at turn 13, one masterclass in survival, aggression, and pure racing genius that rewrote everything we thought we understood about his limits. The sprint is over, but the story is only beginning. Now Sunday awaits, the real Grand Prix, the longer war. God save them all.